Hey, so yeah, I'm Gabby Pierce. I'm a trans union organizer, and I'm on the general board of the Minnesota State AFL-CIO and co-chair the Pride at Work Twin Cities chapter as well. And yeah, I'm real into organizing around like trans and queer issues in labor, and trans rights are workers' rights, and I want to, work to make sure that that shows up in the way we organize in our unions.
My name is Martha Grevatt. I've been a member of the United Auto Workers since 1987. I worked 23 years at a Chrysler plant in Twinsburg, Ohio, which is south of Cleveland. And at that time, I served on the executive board of Local 122. That plant closed. I followed my job to Michigan, to the Warren stamping plant near Detroit, and also served on the executive board of UAW Local 869. I retired from the auto industry in 2019. But I remain active with the union. I'm also a founding board member of Pride at Work, which was founded in 1994 on the 25th anniversary weekend, commemorating the Stonewall Rebellion. And while in Michigan, I was vice president of Pride at Work, Michigan. I'm active in some local struggles here in Cleveland. And I'm also a managing editor of a socialist newspaper, Workers' World. And I'm currently on the steering committee of Unite All Workers for Democracy, which is a reform caucus inside the UAW.
All right. Well, welcome everyone to another episode of Working People, a podcast about the lives, jobs, dreams, and struggles of the working class today. Brought to you in partnership with In These Times magazine and the Real News Network, produced by Jules Taylor, and made possible by the support of listeners like you. So we've got a really special and really urgent episode for y'all today, and I could not be more honored to be joined by our amazing guests, Gabbi and Martha, whom you just heard right there in the introduction. We've been wanting to put this episode together for a while, but, understandably, there's a lot of really dark shit happening in the country right now. And that's, actually in large part why we wanted to put this episode together, right? We obviously on this show spend a lot of time, talking to workers about their lives, their jobs, their dreams, their struggles, their individual struggles, their struggles on the shop floor, and the larger struggles that, we all face in our own way, living in a rigged economy, and, a vicious capitalist culture that teaches all of us to see each other as enemies and competitors and not as coworkers and community members and comrades. And, I think that in the stories that we share on this show, you really see, the effects of that vicious culture, that vicious economic system. But there are also, some that maybe you don't see, depending on who you are and where you're from and, the kind of life that you live. But we all need to be very clear about the situation that we are in this country right now. I'm sure anyone who listens to this show knows and understands the severity of what is happening. It didn't happen overnight. This is a long brewing assault on our LGBTQ siblings. It is a full-fledged assault on the rights and humanity of our coworkers and our neighbors and partners and community members that has taken many forms, right? In state legislatures across the country, trans people are having their rights stripped and their existence basically written out of legal existence in a way that I can only really describe as genocidal, in the hopes that we can just erase trans people from our society. But also, we know that the kind of rhetoric that we're seeing, especially from the right wing, but it's online where people are really targeting and dehumanizing LGBTQ people. It's not an accident that far right assholes are showing up at pride events, that they're showing up at drag story time events, that, really toxic and vicious shit, painting LGBTQ people as quote unquote groomers in the hopes that society will turn against them. And once that happens, unspeakable evils can happen without anyone really taking notice or caring about it. So we have to fight against this as much as we possibly can. And I really wanted to get Gabbi and Martha on the show today so that we could, address this in the way that we best know how, right? Talking from, the ground floor of the labor movement and building on up. And I think what we really wanted to do today is, mainly talk about, what we can all do, like what role the labor movement itself can and should play in fighting to defend and expand the rights and liberties and dignity of our LGBTQ siblings. And also what within the labor movement needs to be done, right, to better, understand that this fight is all of our fight, and to, improve where the labor movement has failed in the past to adequately defend LGBTQ workers. So with all that up front, I want to kind of, do a shortened version of what we normally do on the show, right? Which is get to know a bit more about Gabbi and Martha before we kind of wade into these heavy but important topics. But I could not be more excited to have Gabbi and Martha on to help us navigate this, and I'm really, really grateful to them for the time. So yeah, I guess why don't we start there, right? Like, let's get to know a little more about you both, the kind of work that you do, how you got into organizing as a part of the labor movement, and I guess what your experience has been, or what you've seen the experiences of other LGBTQ workers has been during your time as a worker in the movement.
Yeah, so I got my start in labor organizing by unionizing my former workplace at a climate org called Sunrise Movement. And in that, I found just a great sense of empowerment around trans and queer worker issues. Like when we bargained our contract, we were able to include language establishing protections for trans people. And I think I just found that unions can really accomplish a lot for trans and queer workers, and win us a lot of the things that we need, that, politicians are failing to deliver. And I think that through labor organizing, we can start to implement a lot of the changes that we need by utilizing the power that workers have, because workers do hold the power if we, claim it and take it back. And through doing that and through our collective strength, we can really, I think, make a lot happen. And so that's I think kind of what I found in my entry point to labor organizing. And, since then, I've just kind of made it a big mission of mine, I guess, to give effort toward supporting non-unionized trans workers and unionization, training them up on how to unionize, supporting them in initiating campaigns. And, if we're unionized, we've got more protections, we've got people who have our backs, and we have collective strength. And I think there's a lot of value in that.
Well, my story's a little bit different from Gabbi's because it begins several decades ago. Around 1989, I was sort of outed on the job and sort of came out. And to be queer, to be a lesbian in the auto industry at that time was not a popular position to take. But there was a lot of sexual harassment, and I'll say that I'm a tool and die maker, which is a skilled trade, very male dominated. So I spoke out against some of the sexism, and then the queer baiting started. Just one example, there was a spray can with the label tape taken off, and this bigoted coworker wrote on there "dyke repellent." And I complained to the union. The union asked him to stop. He didn't stop. I complained to management. Its management wouldn't stop it. It just went on and on. Multiple incidents of harassment, both sexist and homophobic. And, continuing this struggle for a number of years. When I found out that Pride at Work was having a founding convention, we hadn't chosen the name yet. At the time, it was just the National Gay and Lesbian Labor Organization, but the convention voted to make it the National Lesbian and Gay, Bi, and Transgender Labor Organization. And then subsequently, we had a steering committee that adopted the name Pride at Work, and that has been with us all this time. And in 1997, the AFL-CIO made us an official constituency group. So we joined the Coalition of Labor Union Women, Coalition of Black Trade Unionists, A. Philip Randolph Institute, and Labor Committee for Latin American Advancement as a fifth constituency group. So I've been involved on and off with Pride at Work over the years. After Pride at Work was founded, we wanted some kind of campaign to show that we are an activist, an advocate for queer workers, and to get us some visibility. So our first campaign was to pressure Chrysler to add sexual orientation. At the time, we weren't as focused on gender identity, gender expression as we should have been, but we had several gay workers, along with myself, that needed this protective language. And the company absolutely refused in 1996 to add that to the contract in the non-discrimination language. And so we launched a pressure campaign, and we picketed dealerships. We picketed a national convention of Chrysler dealers. And between contracts, they agreed to a memorandum of understanding, which is like an addendum to a contract, that the non-discrimination language, was called the Equal Application Agreement, did include sexual orientation. And then in 1999, it was finally added to the contract, along with language that they didn't agree to domestic partner benefits, but they agreed to do a study. And then myself and the then executive director of Pride at Work, we traveled to Detroit, and we met with top UAW leaders and gave them a lot of literature explaining the need for domestic partner benefits, and also that it would not be very costly. And so in 2000, the Detroit automakers did agree to extend health insurance to domestic partners. And at the time, that was years before the legalization of marriage equality. So that was very important for us to have our partners covered. So I've been involved with those struggles about 20 years ago, and remain committed to keeping the labor movement fighting for our rights as LGBTQIA plus 2S plus people.
Hell yeah. I mean, that's just such an incredible story to hear, and really puts into perspective, right? You know, like how long this fight has been, how recent, you know, it was that you know, we got even a modicum of equality and respect for queer workers at the job, and now it's like we took like one tiny step in that direction, and the backlash is fierce. But yeah, I mean, I think that, you know, this is something that has come up, you know, in conversations that we've had, particularly with younger workers who maybe don't know because they weren't around, just like, you know, how bad things still were in the 90s and early aughts. You know, just because the Supreme Court, you know, like legalized gay marriage doesn't mean that battle was suddenly over. And as we are watching happen right now, that fundamental right is very much on the chopping block with this unelected super legislature in the Supreme Court right now that is taking a battering ram to rights, human rights and civil rights left and right. But I wanted to kind of like, picking up on what you were saying, Martha, and toss it back to you, Gabby, and ask like what it's been like for you, kind of in the younger generation of workers coming up, and I guess like what sorts of issues have you found as a worker and as an organizer? You know, Martha mentioned the term visibility, right? Like what sorts of issues that you know, LGBTQ like workers face that maybe aren't visible to others, but also like, I think like one other thing that people need to remember is like, well, we're still workers, right? We all have like a lot of the same issues. So in many ways, like the issue is like not carving us out of the rest of the movement. But I guess I wanted to kind of toss things back to you and ask how it's been coming up for you as a worker and organizer in a different generation.
Yeah, I mean, trans folks at work face a whole lot of issues. I mean, like 2/3 of us report being closeted at our jobs, which, you know, is in large part due to the fact that a lot of us are fired for our gender identity. And so, like, you know, there's this fundamental like concern in our jobs of like, you know, is my identity gonna lose me work? And you know, that's a really scary thing, and it's a really like vulnerable position to be in, especially when oftentimes like you might be the only trans person at your job. And you know, like for a while, I was the only trans woman at my last job, and you know, that gets kind of rough sometimes. And I think like another thing I'd say is that like I think trans issues have kind of been left on the sidelines of like the broader kind of LGBTQ fight. And I think that's something that like is starting to change. And like that's a good thing to see. I think like trans issues starting to get more centered in the way we organize as like an LGBTQIA plus community. And so being in that moment is nice. And yeah, I think that we're starting to see some more change happen right now. And yeah, that definitely gives me a little bit of hope.
Yeah, I mean, like, you know, there have been some really incredible, you know, examples of struggle and solidarity that I think can give us hope in these very dark times, right? Like, just one example that I always think about is I was in the hotel room downtown here in Baltimore when the National Labor Relations Board was counting the votes for what would become the first unionized Starbucks in Maryland, down on Charles Street, the Starbucks location here in Baltimore. And after they swept, I don't think there was a single no vote in that election. I got to chat with a number of the partners there, three of whom are trans, and they said explicitly, they're like, the fact that like it became known that this was a place where, as a trans worker, like you would be, among other trans workers, and that meant a whole lot. And they talked about why that was so important for their organizing, because they're like, we didn't want to leave, right? It was important for us to have this kind of workplace. And so we wanted to take what we liked about our job and lock it into a contract, a union contract where we could bargain for our needs with the company. But on top of that, they also mentioned the healthcare benefits that you get at Starbucks being a lifeline as trans workers. And despicably, we've seen Starbucks threaten to pull those away from workers who are, fighting for unionization. I can hardly think of a more disgusting tactic, but Starbucks is really sinking to new lows every single day. But I think that's one thing that maybe, again, like folks on the outside, folks who, maybe, are cis, straight, don't, think about this as much as perhaps they should. You might not see that. Like Martha said, like, even when, Martha and her coworkers were organizing in the 90s, it was like to get those essential spousal benefits, right, that did not translate to queer partners, right? I mean, like that's really important, right? And yet, like, just getting that up to the level of visibility for people to understand that this is part of our collective fight, an essential part of our collective fight. If indeed an injury to one is an injury to all, like that's a Herculean effort. And so I wanted to like kind of maybe roll that into the discussion of like the internal side of the labor movement. Like, how are we doing? I guess, like, how far has the movement come? How far does it still have left to go? I guess I wanted to ask if y'all could talk a little bit about, before we talk about the role the labor movement can have broadly fighting for LGBTQIA plus rights, how the movement itself has evolved on this and where it needs to go farther.
Well, in terms of understanding, I think the labor movement has advanced quite a bit since I was outed in around 1989, in terms of the statements that might come out of the AFL-CIO or affiliated unions, or even some of what they bargained for in contracts. I think there's much more acceptance of the fact that this is a labor issue. But on the other hand, having good positions on paper only goes so far. And for example, these laws being passed that attack trans youth. These youth many of them are children of labor union members. Many of them, if they aren't, driven to suicide or some horrible situation, are future union members. We want them to make it to adulthood and into the labor movement. So these laws are a labor issue. And why can't the labor movement call a demonstration as the labor movement in the name of the working class in solidarity with trans youth? Why can't they use their power at the point of production to act in solidarity with trans youth and with trans workers, like the trans workers at Starbucks? Our mainstream labor movement it's too conservative. There's a lot of charges of business unionism. We don't have a tradition of political strikes as many other countries have that tradition. May Day 2006 was a day without immigrants. That was a political strike, but that didn't grow out of the labor movement. It grew out of the immigrant rights movement. There was a political strike against the passage of Taft-Hartley law in 1947. About 250,000 auto workers in Detroit walked off the job. But those examples are few and far between. And we need to be willing to use our only real power, which is our power as workers, because nothing in this country or in this world moves without the working class. We've got to have a more advanced view of how labor can show solidarity with our community and any oppressed communities. And also, the deplorable comments by Justice Clarence Thomas after Roe v. Wade was overturned, basically threatened to take away marriage equality. Well, the labor movement has to be prepared to make sure that we have the same protections for our partners that we have when we have the right to marry. That if this right is taken away, and that we're not going to lose those benefits, because some of them, and in the auto industry, when after the Obergefell decision, they took away domestic partner benefits and said to get those benefits, you had to get married. You had to marry your partner, because that was required of heterosexual employees. But Pride at Work's position was always the other way around, that everyone's partner should be covered, whether they're married or not, regardless of their sexuality or their gender. No one should be without health care because they can't get married or because they opt not to marry.
Yeah, I think that in some areas there's a lot of good things happening in the labor movement around trans issues, and like some initial kind of first steps being taken. I don't know, I recently spoke as the first trans woman to speak at the AFL-CIO convention, and that invitation was like a nice gesture, right? And it was a good opportunity to be able to address trans issues in labor. But also it's like, we need more than just like a presence in the room and like acknowledgement of our struggle. We need real action in the fight for trans liberation. And it's not only something that we can do as a labor movement, it's something that we must do. It's our responsibility as a labor movement, I think, because, as union organizers, our job is to fight for the workers that make up our unions. And that means that so long as trans workers are suffering, so long as we're dying, so long as we lack the rights and protections we deserve, our work as a labor movement isn't done. And, while there's good steps being made in the right direction, there's definitely still a lot that needs to be done. And we need to start backing words with action and resources and real energy.
Hell yeah. No, and I think that really kind of raises a question, I guess, by way of sort of getting us to the topic of okay, now what role can the movement play in this broader necessary fight as kind of the attacks, from the reactionary right wing increase. But by way of getting there, like there's, I think, a really important kind of issue that keeps cropping up. If it exhausts me, I can only imagine how much it exhausts you both, right? But like, I feel like it crops up like every other month. It's like a weed in our discourse where that applies both to the labor movement and to politics writ large in this country. Right. Even now, as we head towards the midterm elections and everyone's expecting the Democrats to get their asses whooped, unless they do something drastic, quick. But, you see, the consultant class, the people buzzing around Washington, D.C., coming up with their brilliant plan to quote unquote avoid culture war issues and just focus on quote unquote kitchen table issues like stop talking about trans people, stop talking about queer people, that just alienates this like mythical, I don't know, white suburbanite, middle of the road voter who can be swayed one way or the other by, I don't know, being asked to recognize the humanity of their neighbors. And yet that's like what the political consultant class like is really banking on, right? But it's such a sinister move that just never goes away because people just always feel like, okay, if we just focus on, I don't know, like just raising wages and put everything else to the side, then we can build this big tent coalition without quote unquote alienating people. And I know that like even within labor, right, like this can be a really big issue, right, where folks may feel like in bargaining, right, we just need to focus on, I don't know, our wages and retirement packages and not worry about issues of harassment or accessibility for our members or something like that. Like those are quote unquote special issues that don't apply to the whole membership. So I know that folks who are listening to this are probably still hearing this bullshit. And I guess I just wanted to sort of ask you both, like, what your kind of like take is on that, like how we can get folks to kind of get out of that mindset, like staying within the context of the labor movement for now, and then we'll kind of zoom out to the broader political landscape.
Well, what that brings to mind for me, about 15 or so years ago, there seemed to be a message coming out of the AFL-CIO to rank and file and grassroots organizers. And it was avoid the 3 G's: God, guns, and gays. And I had to tell people off. I am not a letter of the alphabet to be avoided. I am a human being. I am a dues-paying union member. And when you look at all the human beings that face some sort of discrimination or another, whether it's sexism or transphobia, homophobia, ableism, and racism, that is the majority of humanity, and that is the majority of the working class, and that is the majority of the labor movement. The majority of the labor movement does face one or more type of discrimination. And it is a workplace issue, and it is the number one tool of the bosses to divide us. And this mindset of let's just focus on economics, let's just focus on bread and butter issues, let's just focus on what we can all agree on. Well, that just leaves a big facet of the working class struggle out and lets that struggle go unfought. And it leaves everybody behind and perpetuates inequality. And it is really antagonistic to the most rudimentary concepts of solidarity, of an injury to one is an injury to all. And that viewpoint, it has to be fought. by everyone with any kind of consciousness. But we do want to fight for a living wage. We want decent health benefits. We want to get rid of two-tier. We want protection from plant closings and job loss. We want all those things. Queer workers are affected. When my plant closed, it affected me as much as all of my coworkers did. These are working class issues that affect us, and we want to fight on these issues and unite around these issues, but not at the expense of our basic civil rights, but in tandem with the struggle for civil rights.
Yeah, something that I've heard before in the labor movement is this idea of like, oh, I don't know if we should talk too much about trans issues because like that might not land well with some people. And that's always been really agitating to me because it's like my transness isn't some sort of like debate or controversy like people are making it out to be, right? Like I've seen the term the trans debate floating around on the internet, and I'm like, what debate, right? Like I'm just a person, and I'm just asking for my personhood and my humanity to be recognized and not just to be seen as valid and human, but to be able to live with dignity and respect. And, we've got to get past this point of like seeing transness as some sort of like political debate. In a perfect world, like it wouldn't even be a political thing to be trans, right? Because it's like, I'm not trans because I'm trying to make some sort of like political show or take a side on like a debate. Like I'm trans because I'm trans. That's just who I am as a person. And we need to recognize what it means to be trans and like the depth of it as a labor movement, and really like stand and fight for that.
Well, and I think you both really hit the nail on the head, right? I mean, for anyone listening who's still grappling with this, right? I think Martha made the perfect point that is just like, listen, guy, like who's listening to this, right? Like, when it comes down to it, like if you want to fall for the same fucking, pardon my language, same fucking trap that the bosses have been luring us into since time immemorial, which is divide and conquer, seeing your fellow workers or segments of your fellow workers, whether they be undocumented workers, whether they be newly freed slaves, right? Whether they be Asian workers who have migrated over in the 19th century, whether they be LGBTQIA plus workers, right? If it's not like that side of the story is not new. They have been finding ways to divide us and conquer us since the beginning of the movement, right? And if you want to keep falling into the same goddamn trap, like I don't know what to tell you. I don't know how much more proof you need to see that this is how they win. And so even like just from a strategic point of view, like if you want workers to actually win something and actually have kind of power that can counteract the power of the bosses, so on and so forth, then our power, as always, as Gabbi and Martha have already said, our power is collective, right? That is working people's greatest power, is our collective ability to stand together, withhold our labor, show solidarity, and take on the bosses as a group. So you're not helping yourself, you're not helping anyone with that bullshit. So if you're not going to do it for your coworkers who are different than you, at least do it for your damn self. And if you can't get past that, I don't know what else to tell you. But then on the other side, Gabbi also pointed out, it's just like, why is this a goddamn debate? Like, in what world is it okay to consider within the broad sweep of like, what should we as a labor movement do? If one of the questions is like, well, are we going to recognize the humanity of some of our workers or not? If you've asked that question, you've already fucking lost. In my opinion, I'm saying this like as a cis, straight, hetero person who is trying to do my best to like get folks to band together and stand up for one another. But yeah, I think like, the way that Gabbi put it is really what I want everyone to sit with. Like, what debate are we having here? Like, debating the humanity and the rights and dignity of any of our fellow workers should not be on the fucking table ever. Like, end of sentence. And and again, like, zooming out, we see how this is working not just in the workplace, but it is a really vicious and persistent political evil that the ruling class serving forces in, like politics and the media, just like the bosses, they know how to turn us against one another, right? They know that, Republicans know that every time an election comes up, they'll find a migrant caravan to spook everyone out about, right? Because the immigrants are coming to take your jobs, right? Or, as we're seeing right now, they will stoke as much like vicious hatred towards, one segment of the population or another, and they are laser focused on attacking and vilifying LGBTQIA plus folks right now. And if you are just staying silent and hoping it will go away right now, you are letting the evil in, and we can't do that. I'm almost at a loss for words and stressing to people like that way lies destruction for all of us. If we have to stand up for one another and push forcefully back against this, and that's kind of where I wanted us to end up, and it's really been incredible talking to you both about this, and I wanted to really put things into perspective for folks right now as we kind of slip further into a very, very dark decade and a very dark century, I think. I wanted to sort of ask, as I think Martha put it, right? There's a really important frame here that it's not just LGBTQIA plus workers and then like other issues are over here, right? Workers are also consumers. Workers are also, community members, right? I mean, there's so many ways that our roles in society overlap, right? And our concerns can't just be kind of segmented into one box or the other. So I wanted to ask you both, like, as workers, but also just as citizens, human beings on this earth, in this country, like, how bad is it right now? Like, what do you think, like, folks out there who are maybe trying to block it out, like, who are maybe thinking, oh, this is happening in, red states, but not in my state. Like, before we kind of round out and talking about what the labor movement can do to fight the evil that we are seeing kind of grip the country and beyond, I wanted to ask if we could just name that evil a bit and really make sure that people listening to this understand how bad it is getting out there for LGBTQI plus folks around the country.
Yeah, things are really bleak, to say the least, for trans people right now. And the first 6 months of 2022 alone, 14 trans people have already been killed in hate crimes. And in 2021, the number was a record-breaking 50. I mean, in like 35 states, I think, trans hate crimes, murders can be excused through the panic defense. And shit's really bad, right? And there is an all-out assault by the right wing on trans people, and they're gearing up to make transphobia one of their central rallying platform points in midterms in the presidential election. And, it so far, like, I think the Democratic Party has not really been showing up adequately in defense of us. And we as a labor movement, then need to like take it upon ourselves to defend trans people, because we're gonna need it. Things are really bad. They're maybe probably gonna get worse before they get better, but there's also, you know, opportunity to fight back and win if we embrace our strength and collective power and stand for the humanity of all of our fellow workers.
Well, thanks, Gabby. There's not a lot I could really add to that, except that, you know, if we as workers, if we don't actively show solidarity with the trans community, then it's like that old famous quote about first they came for one group and I didn't care. I wasn't in that group. And then they came for another and I didn't care. And then when they came for me, there was no one left to fight for me. If we don't challenge the horrendous attacks on the trans community, then we are doing everyone a disservice, because the fascists will not stop with the trans community. They're not limiting their attacks to the trans community now. We are all under siege by the ultra right, but also by mainstream Democrats who are basically inept when it comes to pushing back the right wing, as we're seeing right now. And it's going to take a united working class movement that is in solidarity with the trans community and everyone under siege. We've all got to unite. You know, it's like they can cut off the fingers of the hand, but when they form a fist, they can't cut off any fingers of any hand. And we've got to form that fist and join hands and push back what the as you said, the capitalists are doing to us. And it's bleak in a sense, and to, whether you say, oh, it's just red states, well, my state is a red state. That's like a lot of us live in the states where trans people and the LGBTQ2IA plus community is under siege. So, you know, it's hopeful too, because there's hope for resistance and for making real change in the kind of world and bringing about the kind of world we want to live in.
Yeah, I thought, that was beautifully put by both of you. And I just like while I have you both, and then I promise we'll wrap up because I can't keep y'all for much longer. But you know, it does have me thinking, and I've heard this from some folks, particularly younger workers, right, who see the attack, especially on trans folks and trans workers, right? It feels like a kind of new thing, and so they're kind of trying to figure out how to deal with it. When I think we need to learn as much as we can from the failures and successes of the past. And like, Martha, I wanted to ask you, like, if just having so much of that experience as a queer worker yourself, an organizer, someone who was outed on the job and had to fight for recognition in a very different cultural climate, you know, like when, you know, again, younger folks may not know this because it was different when you were growing up in school. But I mean, even when I was in school, right, the you know, expletives and derogatory terms, you know, about gay people were flying left and right. It was very much a cultural norm. It was still very accepted, right, to target and bully and make fun of, you know, non-straight people, right, anyone who was different from you. So like, I want us to be very clear that you know, it's not like, you know, this is some random thing that popped up, you know, a historical anomaly, right? This is the long, heavy arc of injustice that has been with us for a long time. Martha, I wanted to just ask if you had any thoughts that folks in the movement today need to understand and learn about how, you know, the kind of bosses and politicians used anti-gay, you know, like sentiments to hurt workers, hurt the movement, and how, like, what lessons we can learn from the struggle that you've been involved in to fight against that.
Well, if things are better now, it's because people in the past fought to make them better. If they were better for me in 1989 than they were in the 60s, it's because of the struggles, like the Compton cafeteria riot and the Stonewall Rebellion, that made things even where I could even think about coming out on the job, as difficult as it was. You know, I owe that to the fighters of previous generations. And the thing is that no right is truly safe that you're not willing to fight to defend. That there's been lots of ups and downs in the struggle, and something that we won in 1973, Roe v. Wade, was just taken away. And what you win can also be taken away if you don't have a understanding that you have to fight and keep fighting to hold on to the rights you have and expand them. That's the lesson of history, of labor history, queer history, women's history, the civil rights movement that inspired all these other movements. And now we see even something as basic as voting rights are under siege. So we just have to be very vigilant. And I did also want to say, Gabbi, that you're absolutely right, that the failings of the mainstream gay movement on the question of trans liberation, that's not fictitious. That's a real thing, and it really set back understanding and unity and solidarity. And I'm glad that there's more unity in the movement now for everyone who's oppressed for their sexuality or their gender or gender identity. But that was a problem, because you'd have somebody might say, "Oh, you know, some of my best friends are gay, but I don't know about that trans stuff." You know, it was very divisive. It's just another way that one movement inside the movement is being divided, and we just have to reject any kind of division that comes from the bosses.
Hell yeah. And I guess, like, by way of rounding out, again, I can't thank y'all enough for joining me and you know, walking us through this important conversation. And we're sending nothing but love and solidarity to you both and to all of our, you know, fellow workers out there who are hurting, who are not getting the solidarity that they need. We see you, we love you, we are with you. And on that note, Gabbi and Martha, I wanted to kind of give you all the last word and ask if you had any final thoughts on, you know, what role the labor movement can and needs to play, right, in this larger, necessary, historical struggle, right, for rights and dignity and equality. But also, like, if you had any kind of final notes for folks listening about how they can better be soldiers in that struggle, you know, like, and stand up for one another in their daily lives, in their workplaces. Like, anyone who's listening to this who wants to stand up for their coworkers, I guess anything you wanted to say to them.
Yeah, I mean, I think to close out with some of my thoughts, I'd say, like, you know, things are bleak right now. Like, trans people are dying, suffering. There's a war waged against our very personhood. But a better world has to be possible, right? Because our lives depend on making that world a reality. And we can win a world where no one's humanity is up for debate, where we can all live truthfully and peacefully, free from hate and violence, where anyone can walk outside into the world without fear because of who they are. And we have to win that world. And we have the power to do that. We have the power as workers to claim our collective strength and build a world that works for us, not the people on top who have propped themselves up on legacies of hate and violence and exploitation. So, let's mobilize. Let's start conversations in our unions about our plans to fight for our trans family. And let's get real about the stakes of what's going on and stand for the humanity of our coworkers, our comrades, and win this fight.